Hey there, it's Paulie here. It's been a week of being sick, but what the hey, I'm back. Yay. I don't know if I told you guys about a game that I cooked up called Tads. If I have, forgive me, it's worth telling again. So, I used to kind of head up my little crazy crew, particularly my kind of traveller game playing buds, and we would run big traveller games at conventions. Now, the basic idea it stemmed from the fact that you can get together and sit around a table with, 4 or 5 friends and play a role-playing game any day. So a convention, let's give you something more. So we would run traveller games that had 200, 300, 400 players at once. We'd take over, literally the convention would just empty itself, which is why the organisers finally really spat the dummy and essentially shut us down, because everyone was playing these big traveller games. They took a lot of organisation. You had usually me as the overall designer who's designed a scenario and so on. Lots of friends have then designed kind of sub-games and sub-scenarios within this thing. So you'd have like umpires running the game. You'd have individual ones that could take groups outside of the main game and like run side adventures for them. You had other umpires that were just running things that made the game work. You also had umpire plants who were players who had agreed to do certain jobs for you to keep the thing going. So they're fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But we did one called Tads. Now, this was really unusual. Everyone got a badge. And it was all designed from basically raising tropical fish. All the wonderful shapes that tropical fish come in, be it discuses or eels or catfish or whatever. It's like, right, they all have a reason. So everyone had a drawing on their badge. And initially, it was just a tadpole. It was a teardrop-shaped thing with a flagellate tail. It's got a little boop of a mouth, a little dot of an eye. And there was a size on there. There was a size, there was a speed. And this was your shape. Everyone is in the pond, which was one big room in the convention. So he told them, okay, this end of the hall is the surface. That end of the hall, that is the deeps, and the wall over there, that's the bottom. So what happened is, at set times, umpires would place essentially like a game money. They were food, but they were color-coded for what sort of food they were. There was always algae floating up at the top. It was easy to get hold of. There was higher protein, kind of higher value stuff like, worms and so on down on the bottom. There was real high protein stuff like little tiny fish that you could try and catch and eat, and little shrimp and things. But they were in different areas. Some of these areas were marked as being having kelp and weed forest. Some of them were caves and things, and in order to get the food from there, you needed to pass like certain agility tests or strength tests or speed tests. However, sort of at the end of every 2 hours, ding, the a mighty bell rings, and your local umpire will update your badge. So first off, you have to have a certain amount of food for your size, otherwise you get sick and your hit points start going down. If you've eaten way more food than your minimum requirements, your size goes up. The type of food that you get starts to govern your shape, and everyone's got a little chart showing what goes from what. But essentially, if you're down on the bottom feeding, you start to get a flatter shape. So you go from a tadpole to more of a catfishy sort of shape. If you are getting some very special foodstuffs, like stuff that's actually hidden like worms, you start getting whiskers and barbells. So, and you get there's a little note, the umpire now knows you've got kind of like, scent sense and so on. You can flatten down even further if this becomes an absolute specialty. If there's no other food in your mix, you might start going from a catfish to flattening down to like a ray or a batfish, something flat. You might develop electro sensors, and this sort of thing. If you are in the faster moving current sections up above and you're chasing other fish, you begin to elongate. You become something more like a tuna or even like a barracuda. You become something designed for speed. If you got really, really into fast chase feeding, there was some really fast food and so on, and that was a resource no one went, you become more like a swordfish. You've got a structure out the front that's designed to essentially spear you through the water. And that's what a swordfish does. If you were down in the rocky areas, you became more agile, so you tend to elongate and become more like an eel. If you were deep in the tall weeds, you became like a discus. You became a flat thing that could move through these tall weeds and kind of rotate and so on. So your shape changed radically, your size changed radically, your speed and everything. So what we had was stickers that would stick onto your badge so that you had a visual track of what everyone looked like as they modified. So it was great, this kind of evolutionary game. And there were actual little adventures, and there was exploring, and this pond, as you got through into areas, it was bigger and bigger. There were strange things going on. The overall scenario that the gamers didn't initially know was that this was basically, you were essentially a bioweapon that had been seeded onto a berserker, a giant planetoid-sized thing that is, or planet-sized thing that is there to wreck and destroy planets. It's cruising, through the galactic spiral arm and doing immense damage. Someone has seeded these things on to sabotage it. So there were actual defenses as people did adventures and started to mess with stuff. The berserkers' local kind of defenses begin to notice it, and they start to send out antibodies to deal with you. So there's things to try and stop you, and there's things they're starting to do stuff. Eventually, they drain out the pond because that seems to be essentially this is a huge coolant pond. So now everyone has to essentially evolve for amphibious action out on the land and everything, and the shape that you're in begins to govern what you could do. So the things that were like flat rays and so on could start trying to hump like caterpillars, or if they started like jumping, and if they got up to areas that were high and tried to jump down, they could volplane. They could basically turn it into a sailing creature, a flying creature. The long swift things, they can grow their fin limbs into legs and so on and become kind of fast running creatures and so on. There was one guy who was hilarious. He did nothing but hover at the top where the algae always was and just eat that. Nothing else. So he turned into a sort of a spherically blob shaped thing. He just stayed a tadpole. But his size was immense because he just ate it all. Everyone else is off doing stuff, exploring stuff. Yeah, I'm going to be swift, I'm going to be this. And just, no, I eat all the algae. So he was always eating like 3 or 4 times what he's supposed to. So his character became elephantine. It was enormous. So when it got time to go onto the surface, he's this tadpole with these 4 kind of stumpy elephant legs. And yeah, he was enormous. He was, this brontosaurus-sized thing. Boop, boop-be-doo, trundling along. And there were a whole bunch of adventures that you could now access by going off into the mountains and eventually you're trying to essentially get in there, and you're finding that there's something sending stuff out to destroy you. You get into these ancient ruins, which weren't really ruins, they were just sort of non-maintained bits of the berserk. You eventually get in there, fight the evil brain and win. So yeah, look, it was a fascinating game. It was Traveller Not Traveller. It was science fiction at its purest. Take a cool idea and run with it. Really interesting game. We had a riot doing it. The modifying stickers and so on that gave you the visual record of what everyone looked like. We got some wonderful life forms evolving out of this as people did all sorts of stuff. Some great side adventures. The change of environment from aquatic to land caught everyone by surprise. And then when they finally figured out they're actually like in a bigger scenario, there's actual aims and goals, and there's actual, overall enemies and overarching things. And some people trying to maybe team up with this thing. Maybe they can be allowed to rule the mighty pond. And yeah, it was a great kind of social experiment in itself. Yeah, a great game. I really enjoyed running it. It was incredible to cook up. One of those cool, unforgettable games. So I thought I'd just tell you guys about it. Tad's a fantastic long weekend. Anyway, cheers everyone.